Okay, everybody, it's 6 o'clock and welcome to Beaver Politics. I'm Treaty 6 Birder and I'm your host for Indigenous Matters every Monday night at 6 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. So 8 o'clock right now in the Eastern Standard Time Zone of Canada. And tonight I have a co-host, the Progressive Moose. He's joining me tonight because we're going to talk about the Ontario election that is coming up this Thursday, and how critical this election is to the folks in Ontario, but also to all of Canada. I'm coming to you from Treaty 6 territory in central Alberta, and I can attest that having problematic premiers is a threat to all of us and our sovereignty as a country, but also our sovereignty as Indigenous people. So I want to talk tonight about the election. We'll talk about a few things. Number one, we'll kind of talk a little bit about the platforms. I don't have a lot of detail because I do have a full-time job, so I was working today, but trying to do my best to kind of scan it. But anybody that does want to come up and talk about that, you're welcome to join us, Indigenous, non-Indigenous alike. I'd like to hold space though for our friends from Ontario. So as much as I love and appreciate my regulars that come and join us on Monday nights, if we can keep some room for the folks in Ontario, if they want to join us, I'd like to give them priority tonight. But if we don't get people up, you're of course welcome to come and join us. We'll talk about how Indigenous voters can sway the vote, and then we're going to talk about some critical stuff that's going on in Northern Ontario, which is known as the Ring of Fire. All right, and I was saying I'm wearing my headdress earrings because Ontario is electing their new chief, and in Cree language, Ogimau, so leader, and hopefully we can make help make some change. All right, so this afternoon I dug around a little bit to look into the Green Party, the NDP, the Liberal, and the PC platforms. I was quite disappointed when it comes to Indigenous matters. There was only one party that has a position or any type of discussion around Indigenous, and that is the Green Party. And they actually have a whole section, which is, 3 pages, which is a lot, 3 pages more than the others had, on their commitments to truth and reconciliation. I looked through the NDP platform and I just actually did a word search I searched Indigenous and I found it once in their document. The Liberals and the PCs have nothing. And another thing I found really interesting when I was looking into the government of Ontario, their ministry that deals with folks like myself is called the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs and Economic Reconciliation. Now this, I'm assuming, is probably branded by the current PC government, because a lot of times when governments come into new roles, like if there's a government change, the new party will rebrand the departments and they'll kind of shift things around and align them differently. This language in itself is problematic. We don't have Indigenous affairs anymore. You may as well just say Indian affairs. These are, I don't even necessarily always like the Indigenous relations much either, but because I used to joking when I was working for a First Nation, we'd joke around and say, we're going to call our department the white people or Caucasian relations, right? Because like that's, how does that make sense? But what really stuck with me was beyond that, okay, we can colonial language, Indigenous affairs, fine. But economic reconciliation. There is more to reconciliation than the economics. And when governments focus on the economic side of reconciliation, all that means to me anyways, is ongoing colonization and finding ways to get us to be economically participating in all of these projects and in the economy rather than being this perceived burden. And that's great if it was done meaningfully and if it's done with our own desires in mind. Now, I want to share what happened here in Alberta. Alberta started an organization called the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, where they would guarantee loans for First Nations to enter into major projects, but only oil and gas and forestry. There were no options. It was oil and gas and forestry or nothing else. There wasn't agriculture, there wasn't tourism, what any type of other economic opportunity that those any First Nation would choose. It's changed because there was some pushback. They have opened it up now to agriculture and tourism, but I've yet to see them fund one. I haven't seen any funding going out for or any loans going out for those types of activities. And what's happened here is the projects that First Nations are buying into in Alberta are in their late stages. So they've already made their money. Now you're going to be owning a liability, not an asset. So this may be coming to Ontario, this type of approach to continue to colonize Indigenous people by bringing us into a mainstream economic situation. It should be on our terms. Like, I don't disagree, right? Go ahead.
Absolutely, if you don't mind. Yeah, no. So I absolutely agree with you in terms of the wording for the Minister of Indigenous Affairs. No argument whatsoever there. And that's essentially, to your point, that's where Ontario is headed to. Being somebody that's in Northern Ontario, and I've worked the quote unquote contractor sector when it comes to contracting in mines and mills and stuff like that. So when it comes to this sort of project, just for the mines themselves, like a lot of people realize or don't realize that there's a lot more area, first and foremost, like how detrimental some of the mining processes are for the minerals they're going for, like the cobalt and the lithium and stuff like that, that they are going to be mining out of these northern mines. But also the space that's going to be used and the habitat that's going to be used or destroyed by creating housing, because most of the people are going to be staying on site, so to speak. So it's like a camp setup where there's going to be housing, there's going to be cabins, there's going to be shower facilities, and you're going to have hundreds upon hundreds of people all at a time staying on site. So you need to destroy more of the land to be able to house these people. And again, to the colonial aspect, they're going to bring in contractors like I've been in the past, where it's all from out of the area and bringing in more people that aren't from the community and essentially colonizing the area by having all these outside people in the area working in the first place.
Absolutely. Okay, so this is just organically taking a turn that I wanted to get to anyway. So thank you for that. Um, because of and so this kind of really takes me to what I wanted to talk about is the Ring of Fire, and then maybe we'll get back to how Indigenous voices can turn things around, because this is really, from my perspective. Now please, anybody that wants to chime in, and I did bring up some folks that wanted to come up, so I'll give you a chance to speak once we've had an opportunity to kind of hash through a little bit here. But the Ring of Fire seems to me to be a really critical tipping point right now. And the eyes are on that Ring of Fire because those metals, those minerals are critically important to changing the way we use energy, right? And batteries, all of those types of things. And I agree with you. I made a list yesterday and I started thinking about some of the things that Indigenous people, the First Nations in the North, especially those remote fly-in communities, need to start thinking about. And I hope there's some of you in the room, or if some of you that are in the room have friends in those communities, because when I was there, when I was in Martin Falls and in Wabakwe First Nation, the connection to land, the community connection, that family bond, the language, the practice of culture, the practice of rights, still living off the land, was amazing. It was amazing to see. It was like I went back in time and I was with these beautiful people who spoke their language. They were kind and caring and giving and sharing, and had yet been, really tainted by some of the ugliness that can happen with resource development. I'm like, I know that we've all had the colonial history and stuff happening, but they still have language. The young kids there, some children didn't speak English at all. They only spoke OG Cree. And I was just like in heaven there. It was so beautiful. I had a chance to kind of whisper in the ear of one of the leaders while I was up there. And I said to them, well, let me just back one thing. So there was an elder that came up to me because we were doing some mapping of traditional use areas. And this lady said to me, she said, can I trust these people? My heart broke because I really knew they couldn't. And this is what really ended my contract. I decided not to go back. And so I did take it an opportunity while I was up there because I could feel the direction. Like this company came up there with $50 bills and they're handing out 50s, and they'd bring KFC and Tim Hortons into a flying community. You're bringing in waste and food that doesn't even fit into their diet, and right. So and what like $50 is great because the food, everything's so expensive up there, but that's not consultation. We're not here to bribe and try to encourage people to be our friends through gifts and money. But I did say to one of the leaders there, I said, please, if you do nothing else, go to Fort McMurray and talk to the First Nations and the Métis there and learn from them what happens when you have major mining operations. Oil sands or minerals, it's a mine. When you bring in workers, roads, substances, then you have tourists, and then you have all kinds of other service providers. You have a demand on your water. You have a demand on your other resources. There's benefits indeed because prices of stuff come down with a road, right? Because now you can truck things in instead of fly them in. Power might be more reliable if there's a road and an associated power line, and internet might also be something that would be a little more reliable because you have a greater population of people coming with these work camps, and who knows if it would result in even in a town, right? Like you never know. So I don't know if that ever happened, but that's something I want to talk about today too, is sharing my experience here in Northeast Alberta with the oil sands operations and how that impacted the First Nations there. Now, the difference between what happened in Fort McMurray and what's potentially going to happen in the Ring of Fire is when the oil sands started, there was no such thing as the duty to consult. So all of this started in the 70s up in Northeast Alberta, and then the First Nations were just getting surrounded. Like there's one First Nation called Fort McKay First Nation, surrounded by oil sands. All you smell is crude bitumen. You hear cannons being fired every 15 minutes or so to scare away ducks and other birds from the tailing ponds. The air is gross. You get a headache. You know, they have one little piece of land left where they harvest and pick medicines, and they have addictions issues. There's some who are extremely wealthy because they've made businesses out of this and stuff too, but there's disparity there. So I am very concerned for our folks and our friends in Northern Ontario within that Ring of Fire area to experience this same type of quick change to your lifestyle. And
And
go ahead.
yeah, no, just to add to what you're saying, because there's a couple different layers to this sort of stuff when it comes to um, the Ontario government, for lack of better words, dealing with the Indigenous representatives and population, um, where we're talking about the Ring of Fire, but they're also planning and already given the rights to different nuclear waste to be disposed in different areas up here in the north as well, which the local communities, me being in one of them, are definitely not happy about. And it was just kind of sprung on the municipalities saying like, oh, hey, by the way, there's going to be a nuclear waste site put in your backyard. And it's the same concept when it comes to the Ring of Fire because, you know, all the mining that they're going to do and all the procedures and all the waste that takes place, like you said, when it comes to wastewater, when it comes to what they're going to do with the stuff that they can't use, what are they going to do with all the extra resources? It's going to get dumped somewhere in a site and get told that, hey, this is our cleanup. We're going to put it here in this pit, and it's going to sit there and seep into the environment around it and create issues. I mean, we see, even I'll use Grassy Narrows as an example, where, that was a mill and, proper oversight wasn't there. And look what happened there. The community's been dealing with mercury poisoning for decades because of it, and nobody did anything about it.
Yeah.
Um, the Ontario government, when it comes to the Ring of Fire, they talk a good game. They talk about, taking care of the local community's wellness. And really, what that means is they're not really worried about the wellness. What they're going to do is when all these contractors come in and bring, like you said, all the different aspects, which communities might already be feeling or dealing with, addiction issues or other stuff like that, mental health issues in different ways, where they're going to do is they're going to put minimal money into the end result. So they'll put up rehabs and they'll put up places to house people that are going through mental health crises instead of dealing with the core issues that lead to that stuff. And it's going to be pretty much empty blanket. Hey, it looks good on the outside, but it's really not doing anything to help the general population with what they're actually doing. So
100%. It's happening here in Alberta. Like we have, like with regards to the treatment, it's forced treatment. It's either jail or you go to treatment, right? And get they're putting them on Indian reserves. And I've actually seen one of the designs for this, and it's not cultural at all. It looks like an institution. So you may as well be building a residential school again. But I I want to touch a bit like an Art, I do see you there and I want to hear from you. But I just want to add one thing to what the Progressive Moose was saying about one thing I know about nuclear waste is it's federally regulated. And I do, as an Indigenous person, I take much more assurance and comfort when the federal government is the regulator because they take the duty to consult very, very seriously. And they will not proceed with projects unless they feel and they can demonstrate that the duty to consult has been meaningful and they have addressed and understood the issues. The problem with the Ring of Fire, and this is where I'm really upset about it. I think I don't know for sure. I'm assuming, so I could be wrong, but I'm assuming that it was the Harper government that turned it around, that all minerals, like the minerals and mining for minerals, is a provincial jurisdiction. Anyways, so that's a problem when it's just the province. And I look on the government of Ontario's website about the duty to consult and the way in which they do it. I'm not confident that they're really going to be meaningful. And I can tell you, Alberta has a ton of consultation going on in this province, but it's bare minimum. It slides in just under what's allowable by law, just so they can check off that box and said they did it. And I'm afraid that's what'll happen in Ontario too. So, Art, if you would like to add anything to this conversation, you're welcome to join us. Are you still there, Art? I can unmute you if you like.
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear
Hi.
me? Oh,
there he
hi.
is.
Hi. I'm relatively new to these live streams. Um, Very kind of you to notice me. I wasn't. I don't know if I accidentally, hit a button that
Oh,
requested something, or I don't know. Um, but no, I've just been enjoying listening to you and Moose discuss these issues while I'm cooking dinner. So I haven't. No, I if I did request to pop in and chat, I did it by accident.
okay. Well, what a happy accident. So,
Yeah, no, but
did
love
you?
seriously. I've tuned in since the beginning, and I've been enjoying listening to you both, and I'm learning a lot. And I did share this as well with a number of my friends on TikTok. So I hope some of them might pop in as well.
Well, that's fantastic, Art. Thank you so much for joining us. And I kind of had a little glance at your profile and see that you you're pretty active in environmental protection yourself.
That's my main bag.
Me too.
Admittedly, it ends up eventually it drags you into politics, which was never really my intention. But you just end up getting so frustrated with the situation, and you realize, well, you just can't sit back. You can't sit back and just see concede control to corporations, right? Because they're inherently kind of psychopathic in that they don't have any mechanism to express compassion or empathy. There's simply no such mechanism within the corporate structure. So, but unfortunately, they also exercise so much control over government, and so that famous expression, the only thing needed for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing. So
absolutely,
we have to do what we can.
Thank you for that.
Well, there you go. I will go back to just listening, and I'll chime in though if I do have any points to raise or thoughts to share.
Please do. I welcome that. And I'm really happy to see folks like you join these conversations. I'm a professional biologist. I was the first Indigenous woman to graduate out of the University of Alberta with a biology degree. Wow. Potentially even Canada, but I lost my letter because I'm pretty sure it said I was the first in Canada, but I don't want to say that without the proof. But maybe. So, but the reason I bring this up is because I have learned my indigeneity through my career. So I really started out as a Western science practitioner. And because of being an Indigenous person, even though I was born and raised in the city of Calgary, I didn't grow up on reserve or anything. And my Indigenous parent really suffered with the shame of being an Indigenous person and kind of wanted to leave that behind and let's just be part of Canada. Which, I'm not the only one. There's a lot of Indigenous people that have that experience because of the shame that was shared, put on us for our indigeneity. But I bring this up because in my profession as a biologist and I'm practicing biologist, I find that we are all aligned. Like folks that study biology, folks that study environmental sciences, they did it. You do this work or you take those classes because the environment, nature or wildlife or something, fish, water, whatever it is, means something to you. So I encourage you in your work, connect with Indigenous groups when you can. Because one thing that a lot of Canadians don't understand is that Indigenous people in Canada have rights that are separate. We have inherent rights. Those are the rights we're born with, the rights that give us our indigeneity. We have our treaty rights, which were signed and settled with us in the establishment of this country. But we also have Section 35 constitutional rights. And those rights all give us a different voice around these tables when it comes to resource development and access to land. So I encourage environmental protection practitioners, if it's climate, if it's you're opposing resource development, or you just want to see better resource development, sustainable development, get those Indigenous voices to the table with you or join an Indigenous table somewhere, because I feel like, and maybe there's folks, I don't want to speak for everybody, but from my perspective, I'm happy to open that door to bring other people in to leverage the situation that we're in as Indigenous people to help advance these issues, because we're doing it together. We're doing it, but we're not doing it together, and I feel like that's by design, of course, because Canada and the provinces may not necessarily want everyone to know that how powerful Indigenous rights are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
go ahead, Art.
Well, I was just going to say you've blown my mind there, because I will happily confess my ignorance here in that in everything that I've done, at least involved with organizations, whether it's a climate strike or a climate rally or some sort of climate action, First Nations are always taken into consideration. Indigenous rights always taken into consideration. We have to do this, taking First Nations into consideration. But I never once thought, I always thought it was something, well, we're doing this. We have to bear First Nations peoples in mind. We're doing this for them. I never once thought, wait a minute, First Nations peoples can be a powerful ally for us, for
Yeah.
anyone who's wanting to take action on environmental issues. I never once thought of that. So you've kind of really opened my eyes there.
And the thing that's different too is because there is a legal aspect to what governments do when it comes to infringing on our rights. So
Yeah,
this makes us a little more powerful than we don't
Yes,
always have the money behind us that some groups and organizations do, but we have those constitutional rights that are
absolutely.
very different. Art, I just started following you on LinkedIn, so
oh,
you'll recognize my
I'll follow
picture.
you back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, there was now I lost my train of thought, so I'll pass it to you, Progressive, because I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I just want to add kind of another layer to this too, because I don't think it's a coincidence when we're talking about Indigenous rights, and especially when there's been so much going on with the AFN and trying to figure things out in terms of child welfare and other issues. And I do my best to try and keep up. And Ontario, in terms of the AFN, like Ontario First Nations really have said like we're going to go off and kind of do our own thing right now, and I don't think it's a coincidence given that Doug Ford has been doing negotiations, or at least his government has been doing negotiations with a lot of different First Nations to do, whether it's the Ring of the Fire or other projects like facilities in terms of building these batteries and whatnot being on Indigenous land as well. So it's kind of an added layer there, and we're really seeing um, his plan to almost divide the indigenous population in the way that it is starting to go, especially when it comes to Ontario kind of just being an outlier at this point. Like I said, within the AFN, it's really kind of toss things up a bit. And, we started seeing Ontario the way it's going. We've seen how Nova Scotia treats its Indigenous First Nations, and how, there's been so much in terms of fishing rights over there. Like you said, in Alberta, a bunch of the different lands and issues. And I see the fight when it comes to fighting for the forests over in the West over here. That's an ongoing. So it's really showing that it's across Canada, and it's just kind of another push that we see from provincial governments to keep doing it.
Yeah, they work hard to divide us. Art, you turned your camera on. Does that mean you want to say something? Oh, you're muted. Hang on, I'll unmute you. There you go. You were muted. Oh, now you're muted again. Hang on. It's me. It's me. Now I can't unmute you for some reason. You do it yourself.
All right. No, it just means I finally figured out how to turn my video on.
Oh, okay.
I haven't done
Okay.
many of these. So yeah, no, yeah, I just figured it out.
Okay.
So I didn't want to be rude. I didn't want to feel like, but here I am in my kitchen cooking while
Okay. Well,
listening.
I'm glad that you joined us and listening in. So I see we have FN Anti Bougie that joined us, and Nikki is here also. Real Native, I brought you up, but you're a regular, so I'm going to hold off for a few minutes, and we're going to let some of our friends in Ontario chat with us. So, FN Anti Bougie, please let us know what you're thinking.
Hi. Hi. I think there was so much you went over in the beginning, and there's about a million thoughts running through my brain, but I wanted to do some listening first, so thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
the problem, so I'm gonna hit a few points. One of them being the duty to consult is wonderful that it exists, but it's really problematic because there's no consequences for lack of consent. Right? It's kind of like we're going to do this no matter what you say, and we'll give you some of what you want if we think it's okay, but no matter what, we're going to keep going. Like
Yeah.
there's nothing there's no consequences. Like if you look at the law and you think about things that are illegal, there's nothing actually that says that it's illegal. It's more like there's consequences, right? So in the other end of the spectrum of that, there's no consequences and nothing saying that you must legally do this. So duty to consult, I find hugely problematic. And the other things that see, I work in economic development, but I work for private developments. So economic reconciliation in private developments. And the problem that we have with a lot of stuff like that is that consultants tend to go in, they have a standard PowerPoint, they go through it, they do their 1 or 2 day workshops, and they walk back out. And there's no ongoing relationship with Indigenous people. So that's a big problem. And teaching people how to connect with Indigenous people is actually what I do. So if you wanted to consult with a First Nation, and you were a business, you would hire me to come in and teach you how to build a safe relationship and a safe path for Indigenous people to be at your table. And so what I've learned is that we're still so far behind on history. But when I look at Ontario specifically, like one of the developments I work on is zero carbon footprint. So we have to be really cognizant of what our goals are as Indigenous people, because we can't keep, you're right, we can't keep being shoved into the same envelope of, oh, we'll help them with economic development, then they won't need the Indian Act anymore, because that's the goal, right, is to end that relationship, which I mean, I get it, but I also know that that's where our treaty rights are tied into, so we can't just straight up dispose of the Indian Act. And when it comes to provincial politics versus federal politics, technically we're wards of the federal government. By law, we're wards of the federal government. So when I have a healthcare problem that, say, go to the feds and they say, well, no, you got to do all this, but Ontario might cover it. And you go to Ontario, well, you're not our problem. You're the Fed's problem because they cover your health care. And then you end up being this hot potato. And that's how things like Jordan's principle comes around, right? But one of the biggest issues in Ontario, as far as First Nations, there's a couple big First Nations that really promote not voting. And I have a big issue with that. But I respect the place they're coming from too, right? I don't think that this is the time to be we're not ready to make those kind of statements yet, like don't vote. I would love not to vote. It stresses me the hell out. Yeah. But unfortunately, it's something that we have to participate in. And then the other stuff you guys were talking about before, like when I worked for I worked for one of the provincial bodies for Indigenous people in Ontario, and the vast difference between Northern Ontario, Central Ontario to Southern Ontario, like it would be hard to see how everybody would work together politically. So it almost has to be sectioned out a little bit towards the same goals. I don't know how to explain that better. Anyways, I've rambled on for a while. I apologize.
No.
But I had a few points I needed to get out after listening.
I'm glad you did. And please stay so that if you want to continue to add. So I do want to just a quick rebuttal about the duty to consult. Yes, you're right. There is no, it's challenging to find recourse because there's no free informed prior consent. The duty to consult is not consent.
Exactly. That's the issue with it. Yeah.
But it is a legal requirement. And when you do it right, I've been doing duty consult since it's a thing. So this is my bag. And that's where I work for industry. I work for government. I also work for First Nations and Métis in this realm. And when you do the duty to consult well, which is really challenging because number one, the cards are stacked against us. The companies come to the table with a whole team of people behind them, bags full of money, all the resources they need. They come to meet with us and we don't even have a full suite of Adobe to read all the reports that they have. Plus, so I'm one person, say like when the First Nation I worked for, I was me and I had an assistant who had no experience in the duty to consult when I first started there. And I had up to 40 to 60 projects in front of me at all times. And plus, I was the oil and gas rep. I was the lands manager for the reserve land and the off reserve land that they owned, as well as led a project, a major ECDEV project on their off reserve lands. I was wearing full full-time job hats,
Don't we
5 of
all
them,
though?
and I made half the money that I made working for industry. But I was blessed. I started my duty to consult career with the government of Alberta. I've worked for the feds and I worked for TC Energy, so Trans-Canada Pipelines. So I learned it from those perspectives. And I also worked for the Métis Nation of Alberta. And I was able to, when I came to work in that First Nation, I was able to put those skills to work that I learned at those other tables. And I knew the things to say. So when you start learning how to work in that world, it becomes a little easier. And then you can start negotiating terms and conditions to hold these companies to account
Yep.
and make sure that they're committed to you until reclamation, till that project is done and it's all put back. Not just up to the permitting stage. So I would always fight, right? I'm going to go through every regulatory process to oppose a project or object to a project or to file a statement of concern or attend a hearing, whatever it takes to make sure that all of those concerns are being heard. But a lot of nations don't have the capacity, be that human resources, finances, tools, like just to be able to analyze studies and things, right?
Yeah, so that is a huge issue. I know for me, I help with a lot of that stuff. I do a lot of the readings. I do briefing notes instead to council and stuff like that. I do a lot of writing and researching for them. And that's why I talk about the relationship though, because the one of the projects I've been with, the long-term one, I've been with since 2017, and I plan to be there till the end, which is another 15 years. Because
Wow.
we didn't just get they didn't just get consent, they just didn't consult. They built a relationship. And so that relationship will always be there. It will always exist between those development companies and the First Nations that connected with them. Like that's they do Christmas parties together,
Yeah.
and one of the things that I always bring to the table too as a thought is stuff like, okay, so this is a big one here in this area is, you'll get called on to consult on a new park in Ottawa. Okay, so they're opening a new park. They want to make sure that Indigenous people are represented in their spaces and blah, 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 the usual thing. And so they want me to bring in 4 people to consult on this park. But when I bring in those 4 people from the res, they don't have a park.
Right?
So with the ones that I work with, I ask them what they can twin in the community. So this year, one of the First Nations that I work with is getting $100,000 art installation that's a bench in a turtle shape, as a gathering
Oh,
space worth $100,000. It's the exact same one that's in the city is going into this community, and they will finally have a seating area in their park for the first time. And it's going to be beautifully custom made designed based on moons.
excellent work, Auntie Bougie. And this is happening across the country in ways. In my experience, again, I can only talk mostly about the Alberta experience, but it's the federally regulated projects where I find that most companies are motivated to do this. Because they have to prove to the feds that they're trying, that they're demonstrating reconciliation. They're trying to address capacity
But we want
issues.
tangible benefits. We want tangible
Yeah.
benefits. So there's also terms like perpetual lease, right? So when a building is full, say you're working on a multi building development where you're gonna have apartment buildings or something like that, you're in an urban community. Are you ensuring that there's low income housing in there? Are you making sure that there's all these different aspects that need to take place, including safety? Now, when we talk about mining and development and reconciliation, when you go to the TRC, the only thing it has is called, actually, I think it's 92 or 94, and all it does is refer them back to UNDRIP, which is wonderful. UNDRIP is great, but really the MMIW report has such better intensive recommendations for developments in mining.
Right. Okay. I got lots of notes I'm taking here. Thank you. So
Well, I'm just blathering because, you know, so many things to talk about.
there really is, and I want to bring this back to. Thank you. I want to bring this back to your experiences then in working with the province of Ontario, with the provincial government. Have you had the opportunity to work with the provincial government when it's led by another party other than the
Yeah, I've worked with the
Conservatives?
Liberals and the Conservatives.
And how can you share what your experience was like? Was it different with the Liberals or
No.
uh,
Uh, you know what? I didn't have a great experience with Dalton McGuinty. I did with Kathleen Wynne, and I've never had a one-on-one experience with Doug, but generally my discussions with him, with his government system, like uh, I deal mostly, well, at the time I was dealing mostly with sports and tourism, but um, it's so hard to explain the energy they have. It's like they don't feel safe either.
oh, okay, I can totally relate to this because we are a power factor and they're always trying to find a way to do as little as they can, but also kind of still meet that threshold, that legal threshold when it comes to duty consult for sure. But a lot of things the provinces do are just engagements, right? So there's no legal requirement for them to talk to us about some of these things. And we're
Exactly.
the risk. We are the risk to almost every policy that they ever write, especially if it's around land, resources, environment, water, children, healthcare, things like we bring the risk to the table. So we do make them nervous. I've seen this too. But
Yes, but we should be making them nervous. We should
100%.
be. And I do. And I like it. No.
I do too.
But
Absolutely. Listen, I hold the Alberta government account also. Like I write letters all the time. I'm like, knocking on doors and stuff. But the sad thing is, like so that's a personal experience you had working across the table with government employees and officials. So obviously they recognize the need to work with us, the risk that we bring to their plans, because they have to consider all Indigenous people in the plans that they're developing. Yet I don't see it reflected in their platforms.
no, it's not reflected in their platform. And people need to remember when Doug Ford first came in, he did some major damage to Indigenous people. He
Oh,
canceled all the curriculum for the new curriculum updates. We were supposed to go to camp that summer and write new curriculum. I had spent 2 years writing curriculum, math curriculum, and I was supposed to go for another summer. He canceled all that, 3 days before we were supposed to leave? Like it's ridiculous. Plus, he took a major. He must have cut $2 million, I think, out of the artist budget. Ontario Arts Council grants. There was one there for reconciliation for Indigenous artists, and I think he cut that right in half.
wow. So the writing's on the wall, right? It's not a priority. But the absence of them, like even the NDP, the Green does have like 3 pages in their platform, and the Liberals nothing. The NDP do mention Indigenous people.
It's a paragraph.
Yeah. But it shows me. You know what it shows me is that they know that Indigenous people don't vote.
They do. I mean, I'm in a conservative stronghold, so I kind of like I care about I will go and vote just to show people that I care, but it's really frustrating. It's really frustrating because I think because I our area is really rural, so like as much as I hate it, the only way that I'm talking to you guys is with Elon's internet. And
Me too. Me too.
yeah, Elon's internet for everybody. I don't know I want to switch, but I don't have an option yet.
Us too.
Uh, yeah, it sucks. But there's never, unless there's minerals involved, like something from the earth, and this is a bigger problem that we need to talk about. I'm sorry I'm taking up so much space right now.
No, this show's for you, honestly, because you were the one contact I know of that was in Ontario that
I
I
was in
had.
Ontario. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
So, and if you have folks, if you want to share this out, please, it's just a friendly reminder, everybody that's listening, tapping is clapping and sharing is caring. So please tap and send your likes and share it out. And, but please, Auntie Bougie, if you've got some friends you'd like to bring up or bring to the discussion.
Well, I just wanna hit one more point before I hand away the floor because really,
Okay.
like, I've talked a lot, but I'm more talking like when we talk about not existing in a couple of the platforms, like that's actually something we really, really, really should be looking at right now a lot harder because people still aren't recognizing in the States what's taking place as an ethnic cleansing of Indigenous people, and nobody's screaming their head off about it, and that's really frustrating to me as I watch it every day. But when we're not included in their platforms, and as you know, federally we weren't either, really, um, it's terrifying. It's terrifying because we are, and all people, European, Canadians, Americans, whoever, you need to realize that we are the one thing that stands between the earth and like climate change, everything. Like we are the thing that protects the earth. We have title. We are recognized internationally as having land, title, and rights to the land and what comes out of it. And when you hear about the national parks in the states being the staff being taken away, so that's another group that's not going to be protecting lands again, and we're seeing a land cleansing in the states, and it's all based on minerals. They're negotiating with Ukraine right now for the same thing.
Yeah.
They want to take minerals out of Ukraine for the states, and I'm just so it's stressing me out that we're not talking a lot about this bigger picture in Canada right now because I feel like maybe the people in the states are in such a time of crisis that they're not seeing this. um and so to not be so to feel it trickle down into these platforms in Canada and not see us even acknowledged as existing is showing us what the end game is, and we really need to pay attention.
100%. I agree with you. And, I do a lot of public speaking, and I often close my talks with Indigenous rights are the solution to climate change, loss of biodiversity, and cumulative effects. And we are the ones, we're the red tape, and we're the gatekeepers. I'm sure
That's
many
right.
of you have heard me say this on my lives and stuff, but when they can disregard us, leave us out of the conversation, leave us out of their platforms, we're the, we know they don't want
Yep.
us. We're in the way.
Yep.
So thank you for your voice, Auntie Bougie. I appreciate the having you here. Please stay up though, and because if
Yeah,
we
I'll
can
take
come
a
back.
I'm gonna take a break and have a sip of water here and let somebody else talk, but thank you for letting me let all that out, guys. I appreciate it.
No, please. I appreciate. I'm really grateful, and that Progressive Moose was willing to join me tonight, so we could talk about what's going on in Ontario. Because, we have to do something. We can't sit and watch this happen, and like what's happening to our friends in the South. It's
Yeah.
very scary.
And just to kind of do a turnaround here back to the Ring of Fire quick. The great thing about the different communities around the Ring of Fire is the fact that they exist. Because unless every single nation green lights this process, it's not going to happen, right? So, in this sense, using the people and using the process to fight back from the nations is perfect.
Yeah.
um, and that's what we're seeing is the process is being halted because I think they've got a couple people that have signed on to it or a couple nations, but other than that, like there's still I think 5 or 6 different nations that have to sign on to different aspects and you know go through the process. So it's really not tangible at this point unless they get enough to be swayed and change their mind. They're really just putting a blockade in front of Ford, and I'd be as far as to say that it's the big middle finger to Ford and his government.
I hope one would hope. What scares me, and this has happened here in Alberta, there's a mine called the Grassy Mountain Coal Mine, which is rearing its ugly head once again. It was kind of put to bed, and everybody, even the non-Indigenous people alike, did not want this. But I was actually consulted on this project for one of my clients here, and I was representing the Indigenous for this project. But what happened is one of the First Nations that's in the close proximity to the mine, the chief and council signed off on an agreement with the company, basically giving them, and what these companies do is they will promise, make all these commitments. Here's 10 years. We give you $1 million a year. We'll invest in this. We'll invest in that. We're going to build you a playground or a hockey rink or whatever. And, but we want a letter of non-objection or a letter of support. So it's saying that it's really not consent, because this whole process doesn't include consent. But what happened in this Grassy Mountain situation is the people of that First Nation were pissed off. They're like, what? Our chief and council did what? And now like they're going to try to blockade, and there's a whole group that have risen up, grassroots group, that are like, there's no way we're going to let this mine happen. But what happens in some of these agreements, and I had one company when I was working for that previous employer of mine, they tried to include a clause that said we would prevent all blockades from happening. I'm like, I'm sorry. I am not a voice for every band member of this First Nation. I can't ever profess to prevent anybody from acting in a way that they feel is in line with their integrity and their values. But they prey upon the situation that we're in. We're constantly in crisis in our First Nations, and we're managing poverty. So they know that if they come and dangle that $1 million carrot, and we all know now $1 million isn't a lot of money anymore. It's not. But when you are on shoestring budgets and constantly in crisis mode, $1 million means something. So this happens, and it's really unfortunate. And I hope that the folks in the Ring of Fire, the First Nations up there, are well protected with some really good legal counsel. Anyways, we'll move on to Nikki. We're good with the Progressive Moose. You're good with that too? Okay, Nikki, you're up, my friend.
Gwe Delawisi Nikki. I'm not in Ontario. I'm in Nova Scotia. But there's a couple things that I wanted to touch on. So I don't have an educational background, but I have a lot of experience working within the environment. I never expected to get into politics until it came to my activism and protecting rights in my area, especially with our fisheries and certain watersheds. And I really want to emphasize how important it is for us Indigenous people to also vote in our provincial election.
100%, Nikki.
Because I find, like, in my province specifically, and I'm sure it happens in other provinces, the province is able to implement acts and put these acts in place that override the federal government and override our rights. We've seen it in my province with the Avon River, where they put emergency order in place to fill a man-made lake, which completely blocks off a river, and it unalives thousands upon thousands of fish. And they were able to override DFO's order in order to override our rights for their political gain. And I know what's happening in other provinces. And I also wanted to mention to Art that, Art, if there's any tribal councils or Indigenous organizations, especially environmental, because of your line of work, I would recommend reaching out to them. I specifically work for an Indigenous organization, and we partner a lot with nonprofit organizations, federal and provincial governments, as well as universities and high schools.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you, Nikki. I agree. We need to participate in all levels of government when it comes to voting, even your municipal if you can, because municipalities often are the ones who are dealing with our waste, our road conditions, things like that. We need to be at all these tables. The struggle is, and I've heard this from the beginning of my career working with First Nations, primarily First Nations. Métis tend to vote more because they've been forced, it was forced assimilation more on them. But I've heard from so many First Nation people who say, I vote for my chief and council. That's my leadership. And they have the relationship with Canada and the relationship with the province. So that's their job to represent them at those tables. But they don't think about how much these chief and councils have on their plates, how underpaid they are, and the workload they have to try to represent everybody's voice, everybody's viewpoint, position at those tables is a lot to ask of your chief and council. And I don't mean any ill will or harm to anybody, but I've seen chief and councils who don't read and write, who haven't gone past grade 8. So this makes it problematic and can cause harm to a community when they're going to sit at tables. And I've sat with some leaders that sit, they listen, but they don't add because they don't have the confidence and the experience to bring to the table whatever the issues are. And that scares me a little bit. It's changing. It's definitely changed. I see such a big change of like younger people are running. They're, the folks that gone off reserve, gone to school, they come back home and they're starting to work in their own community, work for the band office, and then they eventually start to run themselves. And there is a shift. It's definitely happening. And another thing I've seen happen here in Alberta, I've seen councillors that don't get reelected at the council level in their community run for provincial government. So that's a cool outcome when we
It is.
Yeah,
And I know in some communities, so like mine, for example, we have one chief and 3 counselors right now. We have 2 counselors. They have multiple jobs. We have one counselor that does social, one counselor that does education, and the chief is also the fisheries manager. As well as being chief, he has dozens upon dozens of files and consultations, and so they are overworked. And like, I'm very thankful for my chief and council. They don't sell us out. They fight really hard for our rights, and they do a lot of great work. But they're overworked. So there are things that they are missing because they simply just don't have the time and the capacity to commit to every single file.
And provincial and federal government alike bank on that.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, I mean, look at the makeup of governments, even if you want to go on a municipal level versus, like you said, like a council, it, the number disparities, right? Because there's more resources for municipalities and they have more people working for the municipality than you see on First Nations, right? And that's in place by design by the government, so that way, they can't have the more resources to further progress and get stuff done without the help from different levels of government at the same time. It really just creates like almost like a lack of better words, codependency on the different levels of government to even just get anything done at that point.
And municipal, provincial, and federal have a lot more resources. So especially when it comes to the environment, and I've learned this firsthand working for an Indigenous organization because I work in the aquatics department, but I also work with lands and forestry department as well. And in my area, our chief and councils rely on our work. They rely on the scientific data that we collect. They rely on everything that we do to ensure that they have some of the resources. And that's why it's so important to partner for government and non-governmental organizations to partner with these Indigenous organizations so we can all have a collective data. So therefore, our people have a fair chance at making informed decision.
100%. Thank you for that. And I even like I've done this too in my work is partnering with organizations, partnering even with other consulting firms, like an environmental consulting firm, and into a revenue share type relationship. But then that partnership becomes an extension of your office in a way. So, like I was saying, how just for example, I didn't have the full suite of Adobe, so there were some documents I couldn't open or read properly, or the formatting was weird, and so I would send it to them, like the consultants that we partnered with, so that they could just basically, convert it for me so I could read it. Just simple things like that go a long way. But and then we can leverage our rights to help those organizations advance their position while they're sharing their resources and their capacity with us. And that's what makes it a mutually beneficial relationship.
Exactly. And that's what in my nation we call Ado Optimum, two-eyed seeing.
Oh yes, I actually just did a video on two-eyed seeing yesterday.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, check it out, and I'll follow you back. So I'm curious, Nikki. I really love what you said. And tonight, our primary goal tonight is how are we going to get Ontario, First Nations, and Métis out to the voting polls this on Thursday, right? It's Thursday, I do believe, is election day, and like I heard what Auntie Bougie was saying, that there are some large scale First Nations in Ontario that are kind of against participating in this colonial system, which I understand too. I get it, but we all know that it's not going anywhere. And unless we participate, then we get left out of these platforms. That's what this tells me is they know that Indigenous people in Ontario don't vote. They're not going to read this stuff. So why waste some time, especially when you have a snap election or, and you don't have a lot of time to throw a platform together. It's easy to leave that piece out because they know that folks aren't going to necessarily be looking for it. Sadly.
We had that same problem here. We had a very quick election. We ended up getting a super majority of conservatives. And I was, the moment I found out we were going to be having an election, I was out in my community and I was talking to the elders and other community members. And something that I found is a lot of it was the lack of understanding of how it can affect us. Even though we are children of the crown, provincial and municipal still affect us. They still affect our rights. And because of being out there and having those conversations and getting those conversations going, my cousin and his family, he is 53 years old and has never voted in his life other than chief and council until this year because he finally understood that it all affects us. And then he started going and talking to community members. And so I think the biggest thing is having these types of conversations, both on app and off app, so that way everyone is understanding of how we can also be affected by these elections and being able to have the education and the knowledge to make an informed vote.
100%.
Absolutely. Just to add, just quickly for Ontario, guys, I don't have specifics in front of me, so I apologize for that. But there's been, when we're talking about, again, getting out to vote, a lot of the case, I think, in Ontario is because there's been so much clashing with government and law enforcement in Ontario with, you know, Indigenous land and the First Nations lands and rights, where there's been blockades put up around reservations and whatnot in Ontario. I don't know how many times as there's clashes, and I think here more so, that's where a big obstacle is in Ontario because why are again, it gets back to the point of why would they vote in a system that just keeps oppressing to the point where, it does get violent or it does get to the point of clashes with law enforcement.
Absolutely. It's intimidating too, right? Like that is the intimidation factor. But I can't help thinking right now as we're talking about this, about Wob Canoe and what happened in Manitoba and what we can learn from that. And I know we're only days away from Ontario, and we have 34 people in our room right now, so probably not enough to sway a vote. But that's 34 people that are hearing the conversation. That 34 people can talk to two other people, and but how I'm hopeful that even if it's a PC minority, is better than a majority,
Somebody
right?
needs to oppose Doug. Somebody needs to fight harder with Doug. I'm sorry, but I'm just like the leadership in Ontario between all the parties is just, it makes me want to hide. It
That
makes me want to hide. There's just nothing,
yeah,
nothing.
just
Yeah.
just to add to that, like all their platforms really, even NDP, the only one that sticks out and we talked about before is the Green Party, but the other three, in all honesty, even the NDP, when you go through their promises, you see a lot of wording where they're still worried about corporate interests, right? The liberals won't go as far as to say they'll cut um, red tape for first-time home buyers and whatnot, yada yada yada, which is in there, but they're more worried about development fees and cutting red tape for developers as opposed to the people.
Yep.
Same thing when it comes to affordable housing. Their plan would actually, it's like partial privatization of it as opposed to like the Green Party or NDP when it comes to the affordable housing aspect would be solely like um, built purpose built housing, um, under the government, and there wouldn't be a private aspect of it, right? So it's all the different things within how they say it. You really got to pay attention to, and all of them really is about corporate interests. Again, except for Green Party, because they all talk about the economy and how we need to bolster, business, which they're not wrong, but at the same time, you have to invest into the people that make the businesses function and move forward.
Right on. Yeah. So, um, I was just glancing up at this, and I'm pretty just looking at this Green Party platform is really actually it's quite impressive, and they talk about ending environmental racism in Indigenous communities, and that's so much of what's happening is environmental racism, but on the flip side of that, the federal government is working on legislation regarding environmental racism right now under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. So it's Environment and Climate Change Canada. Just for those that are listening, if you're interested, I think there's even a comment period still open. But there are loopholes. There's ways around these things, but they make us work so hard to hold provinces accountable. um, Another idea I had. So full disclosure, I'm a card-carrying member of the Liberal Party of Canada, and I am so strategically because I know that they're oftentimes the leading party. It's them or the Conservatives, and the Conservatives I would never align with. I do feel myself to be much further left than the Liberals, but in that capacity, I can go to the convention. I can participate in the Indigenous Peoples Caucus. I have even drafted policy for them to consider. I was able to have a conversation with Mark Miller and Patty Hajdu when I was at the last convention, and I said to them, and I share this idea because I want, the more we hear this, they hear it from us, is I asked them, I said, you guys need to start thinking about putting reconciliation terms and conditions into the transfer payments to the provinces. And they don't get their money until they prove that they've met the objectives of those conditions. So Mark Miller said, that's a really good idea. However, I've never seen anything actioned from it. And that was just in passing in a conversation. But it is one way for us to politically motivate provinces to do better, is to try to start playing this political game that's here. It's colonial. It's a system that's imposed upon us. It's a system we don't see ourselves as part of and working within. I started my career in the federal government, so I've been fortunate enough to learn to navigate it and to understand how to read and legislation and regulation and how it applies. But that's not everybody's circumstance, right? So how are we going to start changing that to get our
Well, and
people to
that's
be more involved?
yeah, and to me, I'm glad you said it the way you did because it reminded me of something I forgot to say earlier. Where, in all honesty, like when we're talking about colonialism, let's look at it in that lens in terms of what, like you guys need to destroy the system from within, right? So You need to go out and vote, and you need to dismantle the system by making your vote count, right? Because they're not expecting the indigenous vote to go out. They're not expecting people to go out and let their voice be heard because, like we've been talking about, there's that mindset of not being a part of things in protest, and I think it's time to start being a part of it and taking it over, right? Like you said, there's so many indigenous votes out there that could be cast and really could make such a difference. Let them be heard. Let them make the difference. Dismantle it. Get rid of the status quo. They'll have to pull up their pants and actually fight for your vote.
Absolutely.
I wanted to say too, I think like when it comes to Indigenous people voting, like if you haven't noticed, we're not a big group compared to others on this app. We're small people. But I know that I've committed to cleaning my car before election day. I'm gonna call starting that morning, like texting. But if by noon you still haven't committed to a time to vote, I'm going to call you. And I hate calling people, so you shouldn't make me do that. And like hate talking on the phone. And so like I think that we all need to commit to like doing that the day of and starting the day before is just going through our contact list and those the ones that we feel like we can comfortably hassle about it. Did you vote? And offer a ride, offer like I'll buy you a coffee. Come on, let's go. I'll take you for a ride. Get them to the polling station. Make sure they have their ID. Like I think that's the only way, and I do believe that a lot of what we've lost in politics is that we've lost community again because of digitization and a whole bunch of other oppressive crap, as usual. But the digital world has really changed us, and we can't keep looking forward without looking back and bringing our community with us. So that outreach is really important. This will be the first year that I'm reaching out directly, and I'm going to be targeting like a lot of the young people I see around the community and stuff, and just saying like, "Did you go vote yet? No, your first time. Let's go." Like let's just be good people on the day of and do it.
Yeah. So I just looking at the time, and we can go till 8, but I want to, anyone else that wants to come up, please come on up, join the conversation. Tapping is clapping, sharing is caring. Yeah, and I'm going to say, like my friend here, Progressive Moose, says, you heard it here first, people. Go along, get your car cleaned out, get your friends, and take them to the polling stations on Thursday. Make sure they have their ID. Thank you for that, Auntie Bougie. That's beautiful. And I'm really happy to hear that you're putting that much energy into this election, because I see your videos and stuff that you make too. And I know that you know the gravity of this situation we're in. And it's scary because I'm afraid of Ms. Smith, my premier, and your premier, Mr. Ford, because those two have some kind of stuff going on with Mr.
Well,
Trump
and
down there that scares the crap out of me.
Danielle's real obvious about it. Like she has no sense of decorum whatsoever. Doug does everything behind closed doors. He doesn't show up to stuff. I always say like our province is being run by the mob. Like that's what it feels like is we live like we don't know what's going on ever. Ever. There's very little communication. Like it's just it's really frustrating in Ontario. I think because of the size of it too, that has an impact on it. But to have such a premier that's the only time he's in the spotlight is when he's saying something ridiculous. Like it's exhausting.
Yeah. I see Drax Facts. I see that you want to come up. Just hit one of those request buttons. Oh, here, I can invite you. Let me see if I can find you in the list. But Sasquatch, welcome. Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. I'm not an Indigenous person, but I have a lot of family and a lot of close people in my life, and it just means a lot. And I'm in a very rural northern BC community where everywhere there's these very small rural communities that are mostly Indigenous, and it's really nice to see. I don't know about like the political kind of engagement, but seeing like logging companies getting rights to timber sales and seeing these Indigenous owned companies and the way they run things is mind blowing. I was raised, so my dad had a logging company in the early mid 90s. He started it, and just watching the way that they run things a little bit differently, there's a little more. You don't see them throwing a skidder tire and burning it and throwing buckets of oil into the fire. Indigenous people just have a little more respect for the land, and it'd be really good to try and integrate a lot of that respect and that focus on community, because white people don't, they're very individualistic. You move out at 18 and you're on your own, and you see the way that we do things doesn't work very well. You see people struggling with their kids, people lose custody of their kids, and if we did things in a more community minded way, it would make things so much better. We would communicate better, people would have a lot more support and resources, especially if they're in poverty or they have disabilities or anything that kind of makes life harder for them. And I don't know, I have utmost respect for Indigenous people. They have let me sit in with their culture and let me get smudged, and I'm just like, thank you. I appreciate it.
I love that. And this is such a beautiful thing. This is how we create community that's just, not defined by borders.
Yes.
Or race, right? And culture, because our culture is very accepting and welcoming. You're welcome to join. I'll bring you. Okay.
I'm from Ukraine.
Oh, nice. Hello, sir. Okay, I'll just finish my thought and then we'll pass it to you. Okay. Thank you. But so maybe this is another good way to help us get more people to vote too, more of our Indigenous people, is through these relationships within communities that are close together. Sometimes, and I know from an Alberta perspective, is that there can be real sour history between the municipal, like the little towns, and the adjacent First Nation. So, but that's changing. It is changing as the kids are coming to the schools more, and like you see the kids coming off reserve and going into the town school, and towns are starting to realize too, their economies rely on these neighboring First Nations.
Absolutely. We have people I grew up in Prince George, so we've got Fort St. James, Burns Lake, we've got all of these Indigenous communities, and where do you think they go to shop and get groceries and go to medical appointments and stay in hotels? They come for, like, we have these huge youth hockey things go on and stuff, and it's like they're a massive part of our economy, absolutely massive. And their culture is a huge part of the way of life up here, like hunting is part of the lifestyle up here. And that's, like, you ask Indigenous people, they know what they're talking about.
Manando.
Oh, hang on, we'll bring you up, Terry, when it's your turn. Sorry about that, Sasquatch. Terry, we take our turns. In our Indigenous way, we take our turns, and I try to let everyone have a chance. So we'll let Sasquatch finish her thought, and then we'll turn the floor to you. Thank you.
Yeah, and just, on Wob Canoe, I was aware of him, and he's just a wonderful man. And I remember, I want to say maybe last year, he was at a funeral, I think in his own community, and he's out there in his nice suit looking smart, and he's down on his knees changing an elder's tire. And you do not, when are you ever going to see Pierre Poilievre or Smith or Doug Ford do that? Never. And it's just to see, I think that, like going beyond borders to see humanity. And for me, when I was younger, I never voted. I'm going to vote for this old white boomer guy that owns 3 houses and has no clue about what I need in life and has no idea what issues I have. They're not struggling with mental illness, like misogyny, working in the trades. They have no idea what my life is like. And seeing a man like Wob Canoe, I don't care who you are. If you have that humanity, I have faith in you, because you are going to have respect for me and my neighbor and the homeless encampment down the road and the business that's running down the road and the big corporation that's trying to function to keep jobs going. They're going to understand and respect all of it, and they're going to work towards humanity instead of, an NDP, in my opinion, is the most anti-corporate, not just, like left and, left of centrist, but anti-corporate. I was digging what Jag Meat was singing. He was talking about getting BlackRock out of here. I was like, I'm listening to every word you say, sir. I am a millennial that can't buy a house. Like, I am hearing what you're saying. And just seeing, I'm very happy that he's with NDP because I align a lot with NDP. And just seeing someone that's Indigenous, and even like a lot of the other people in politics in Manitoba, very diverse. And like that just shows we are going somewhere. We are going in a good direction. It's not always the most obvious because we see the hate and that gets the most views and people are so divided. There is a lot of good bubbling up underneath the surface, and it's a little seed that needs to just keep getting through the dirt and sprouting. We're going to get somewhere, I swear.
Yeah, that's so true. And, I can't help but wonder, thinking about, this is a quick election, right, that was called in Ontario and kind of a quick turnaround. If that was by design too, so that folks that aren't quite paying attention or, distracted elsewhere, and also giving us like this time to rally up the Indigenous voters and stuff. So, and even what happened in Nova Scotia.
Absolutely. A part of it here in Ontario absolutely was strategic. I mean, we saw things beforehand, like the $200 checks he sent every Ontarian, and other policies that he had put out pretty much right beforehand to bolster himself and get ready for an election. Um, yeah, I mean, that $200 check is prime example. That's just pure on, bribe, like, hey, I just gave you money, so vote for me.
That's right.
Even the way he was trying to be so pro-Canadian and we're going to pull American liquor off the shelves. Again, it was
Yeah.
a really sneaky get in there and look like the good guy. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a ruse.
Yep.
Okay, well, Terry, so thank you, my friend, for your patience. I'm sorry I had to cut you off. Thank you, Sasquatch. You're welcome to stay up and add to the conversation because we'll do some closing remarks in a bit. But Terry, the floor is yours, my friend.
What do you think about the cows and plows payments and payouts for bands with their chiefs and council stealing the money and not dividing it equally, and there not being any money left over as it should be in any class action lawsuit? What do you think that the bands should be doing instead of ripping off their people? And should the counselors and the chief that are doing that, because it's illegal in this cows and plows, in cows and plows, in any kind of government payout where there's a class action lawsuit where a band is represented, its people through the band's obligation is to take that money and award it and divide it equally. Not one single band has done that for any band members in cows and plows. They use
excuse me, Terry.
One
Are
second.
you Indigenous?
I am, yes. So,
All right.
So 1 second, I'm not finished. 1 second. So not one Indigenous band has actually taken that money and divided it equally and dispersed it continuously, legally, as it's supposed to. So do you think the leaders should be held accountable criminally, and what do you think the punishments should be for chief and council that rip off their own people?
There's existing policy around that already exists.
And also the cows and plows agreements are unique to each nation. They're negotiated separately, and they're not every nation is committed to doing what's called a per capita distribution. And I don't know that this was a class action lawsuit, but it's a settlement of an unrealized treaty obligation. But I could be wrong. Like, I know it's that. I just wasn't.
It becomes a class action suit when you represent a group of people in one entity as an entity. That's a class action.
So what First Nation are you speaking of? Because every one of them is different.
I'm not going to out it, but I'll say Treaty 6.
I'm not. That's out west, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
Treaty
what
6.
I am.
Treaty 6 is Saskatchewan. Are you Treaty 6?
I'm in Treaty 6 Alberta, but I'm.
Okay. Oh no, so you're not Treaty 6 Saskatchewan?
I'm not treaty.
What's
and
that?
my First Nation is Treaty 4, actually.
Treaty 4. So if you're in Treaty 4,
I live in Treaty 6.
What's that?
I live in Treaty 6 in Alberta.
Okay.
But my First Nation, my ancestral lands are Treaty 4.
Treaty 4 is Ontario, isn't it?
No, Capel Valley, Ontario, or Saskatchewan.
Okay, so I'm 345. Do you know that band number?
I can know it pretty quickly.
Yeah. Look up 345, and then you'll know. Then
You
we'll go
can't
from
just
there.
say the name of the First Nation?
I prefer not to. She can do her thing.
And you know what,
So
sir?
why
As
are,
much as go ahead.
sorry.
No.
Well, I'm just, you know, if you're actually Indigenous, and I need people who are from First Nations. First of all, only First Nations people have chief and councils. But I need to
You know where I'm
understand.
from? You know where
I
I'm from?
do. Yeah, I've been there actually.
Yeah. So you know of our past. I don't even have to say it. You know of the people. You know
Yeah.
of what we're going through. We're
Yeah.
about to get ripped off on our cows and plows, and I'm kind of wondering if any other band has. So what they did is we got a settlement for 116. The number's up there, which equals out to after you pay everybody out. They're offering to pay us $21,000. But here's what they said. They said they're saving the rest of the money for the band and future generations. In class action lawsuits, you cannot do that.
Yes, you can. And
No, you can't. You
yes,
cannot. Your name in a class action law. Let me explain to you because I went to law school. Your name in a class action lawsuit is put there as well as everybody else's on an equality list. A judge looks at it and he goes, okay, well, the damages are this much for this many people. And then they say, okay, so beside your name in a class action lawsuit, especially cows and plows, where they're trying to basically take away your rights for not meeting meeting the obligation, they write your name down and say, okay, we're giving this person this much money, and then they send it back to a list. It gets okayed by the lawyer says okay, he checks it, and then it goes back to your band.
Okay.
Next to your name on that list is a payout by the government which you should receive. Now what happens is before they do that, your band says to you, well, you know, there's not going to be any more for the future generations, and we need to save this money, huh? And everybody who isn't educated, one second, listen to me. Everybody that's not educated goes, he's right, we should save it for the generations. But what is happening is that's illegal because every dollar they give to cows and plows is supposed to be divided amongst the amount of people. They can't add or subtract names. It's a binding legal contract.
Okay. Listen, I'm sorry, Terry. I want to cut you off. I'm sorry, Auntie Bougie, for 2 seconds. Because, sir, our topic tonight is the Ontario election. So I invite you, please join us. We do this.
I didn't know that.
That's okay. That's okay. But we do this every Monday night. We talk about Indigenous Matters. So I'm Treaty 6 Birder. And if you'd like to follow me, we can connect and we could do a whole show about this if you'd like. But for tonight, I really want to talk and keep on track for the Ontario election because it's really important for our Indigenous people in Ontario to
Yes, I agree. I'm sorry. Really quickly, can you reiterate on that? Do you have any thoughts of what direction a band can do, like, or what the people can do? So what we're looking at, and I don't mean to I will take very little more of your time. What we're looking at is the minute they don't pay it out in full, we're looking at going and taking them for a class action lawsuit because that money is for us divided equally. So they can't basically hold on to that money and disperse it how they would like to. Even though some bands think that they can't by legally contracted obligation.
Okay. Let's have this conversation next Monday. Please come and join us. We'll talk about it. But off the top of my head, what I want to say to you, as I'm pretty sure that there were some consultations that would have happened in your community with your chief and council, your legal counsel, and that they should have been going through the agreement that they signed with Canada with all of you, line by line. Now, I've heard that many nations haven't had that opportunity and that they were left out of that conversation, perhaps. And if that happened to you, that's really unfortunate. But please, let's connect and we'll talk about this next week. Because I want to do some research around it myself so that I can be better informed and help have a more meaningful conversation, okay?
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'll see you next Monday.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
I've added you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that was a really interesting stuff that happens, though, in our nations, honestly, and important conversation to have. So thank you for bringing that up. we'll talk about that next week. But let's get back to Ontario, what's happening there. And please, if anybody else from Ontario would like to come up and join the conversation. But Progressive Moose, do you want to add anything more? I remember you, was it last week, I think, or the week before, you had a lovely lady that came on and was speaking about the election as well. And I was hoping maybe she would join us tonight. And I meant to send you a message and ask you to invite her, but I forgot. So if you want to bring up anything that she was sharing with you too, because she was very wise.
Yeah, I honestly like thanks for thinking of that because I'm trying to rattle my brain as to who it was at this point. It wasn't even, it was just somebody that came up and happened to have the
Oh,
knowledge that they did. So, um, yeah, no, I'm trying to think back to the conversation and who that was. I mean, there was so much that I had covered last week and so many different topics and kind of avenues we went down, right? The biggest thing to me, guys, in all honesty, is when I look at the platforms or, you know, the promises that each party has made in Ontario, it you've got two options at this point, in my opinion, and you know, people can disagree with me if they want, but I mean, when we're talking about platforms for the people, and like you pointed out, like the Green Party is really the only one that specifically um, talks about Indigenous issues and brings the Indigenous into the conversation at all, really, um, in any way of substance. Really, the Green Party is the best option in terms of for the people, and I think for helping and wanting to bolster the Indigenous communities. But I mean, at the same time, I realize, you know, there's a lot of voters that are going to be strategically voting, so for those people, I would say definitely go to smartvoting.ca
yes.
and go check out your riding because it has
I just,
the most up-to-date polls and percentages as to who's projected to win, and you could go strategically that way. Um, yeah, other than that, when it comes to getting out to the polls on Thursday, I've been telling people go to if you have any questions or concerns about where you need to go, what you need to be able to vote, time, any of that stuff, go to elections.on.ca, which is on Elections Ontario, and you can find all your resources there, find the information you need, your polling stations that are available to you. All of it's on there. So
yeah.
take advantage of that resource, and they've got an app as well. So you can even download the app onto your phone so you have it in the palm of your hand come voting day and you know you got the proper information.
Absolutely. I actually went on the website today to check to see if a nation like Webequie or Martin Falls, where they had to go vote. And it's a little bit of a trick. You've got to select a First Nation reserve, and then it's a drop down menu. Find your First Nation there, click on it, and then it'll show you exactly where the voting polling station is. So just for example, because it's a nation I've been to and I'm familiar with, Martin Falls 65 is their polling station. Theirs is going to be right at in the band office. So you can find where to vote. I'm really actually was quite happy to see that Ontario does have the polling stations in the communities for them. So, which in Alberta doesn't always happen. You have to
Yeah,
go to a neighboring
and
town.
and in all honesty, at this point, a lot of people are saying like even if for whatever reason you can't find a way to get to the polling station, reach out to one of the parties like you're within your district, and I can almost guarantee you they are scratching at the bits for votes. So even honestly, if you don't plan on voting for the party, but you get a hold of somebody at a party that's willing to drive you, take the ride and go vote for a different party. But they're willing to drive people because they want people to get out and they want the people to vote. So that's always an option as well. You can find normally your local candidates on Facebook, social media, all that stuff. And you can look it up online as well. Again, Elections Ontario has that sort of information as well. So, you know, another way to use it for resources that way.
And I want to challenge our Indigenous people in Ontario. You know, we're known for piling into a car to go to the bingo hall. Let's pile into the car and get to the polling station. So, anyways, this has been a really good conversation. I still see we have still 25 people in the room, which is wonderful, and I hope that we've shared something of value. If anybody else wants to come up and add any more to the conversation, you know, we do have about 25 minutes. We could continue on, but I also know that there's a lot going on in our lives as Indigenous people. You know, we all have family commitments. I can also attest, and I'm sure Auntie Bougie knows, will say the same thing. What we do for our careers is often very personal because we're either working for our communities, our families, our rights, our land. So it's really I always try to be mindful of that and taking up people's time because our time is valuable. And I always find when we get even if you just get a little extra 15 minutes because a meeting was cut short, it's the gift of time, right? And we don't always get that given to us. So I would love if anyone else wants to come up, but if not, we can close off for the night and continue to check those resources, read those platforms. Even if you don't see yourself reflected there, don't just look for that Indigenous piece. Read it. Read it and read through the lines. Where we're missing is by design. When we're not included in their environment platform, when we're not included in their health platform, their housing platform, the child and family services platform, even the economics, even though that's what Ontario professes, they have economic reconciliation. If you don't see it reflected in writing in their platform, then we're left out of the conversation. And I encourage you all, call your candidates, even after the election. You know what? Even after the election and you didn't get a chance to vote, you still have a right to hold those people accountable. And even if it's an MLA, or I don't know if it's an MP or an MLA in Ontario, here it's member of legislature. But those people work for you. They work for us as the citizens of the province that you live in. And I will always attest when like my parents sometimes will, why are you always writing to the MLAs? I'm like, because I'm their boss. That's how I see it. I'm
Yeah,
their boss. They work for us, regardless if I voted for them or not. So even if you don't get a chance this time to vote, stay active, stay informed, use your voice, hold up your rights, make sure you play that Section 35 Constitution card, play that treaty card, play that inherent rights card, because those rights that we have are powerful and it scares the crap out of them.
absolutely. And yeah, so in Ontario, it's MPs.
Okay.
But yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we vote them in and they work for us. That's the whole point of an MP, right? And that's another thing for people. Go again, we talked about looking into your candidates within your local ridings. Look into their platforms as well. Again, there's so many different avenues where we got to look at whether you're strategically voting or not, whether you're going just solely on your needs and what suits you the best. But always just guys, look at everything you can. Make sure you are as informed as possible when you go to the polls. That is the biggest key thing that I can tell people. And make sure you look at wording. Make sure you look at if they're doing interviews or doing debates, how they say something. And especially with the conservatives, I'll never tell somebody how to vote, but look at how the conservatives' track record is in Ontario with all the different promises and scandals and lies and everything else. We've got a track record to be able to base things on for the conservatives. So we have to take that track record into account. The other parties, all we have is promises. And that's how the system works. So hopefully they stick to their promises. And if they do end up getting a chance, hopefully they'll move forward with things.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did have a late arrival here, Jojo. So I brought Jojo up. And I also did see that Drax for Facts, if you still want to come up, you're welcome to. We got 20 more minutes if we want to spend time to chat. So Jojo, the floor is yours, my friend.
I just wanted to mention on the Ontario elections site, you can sign up for online voting. So if you can't make it out to the polls, you can still get your vote in, which is really important because not enough people know about it.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And that was everything that you wanted to share?
Yeah, that was the main thing.
Oh,
My phone's
perfect.
gonna
Hey,
die, so I'm gonna have to hop back down.
okay. Information is power, and we appreciate that. Thank you. And I do want to say, is like Drax for Facts, I kind of been catching a little bit of what you're saying in the comments, but I'm not good at dividing my attention. But I did see that you wanted to talk about Energy East. And I'm curious as to what you wanted to talk about with regards to Energy East. I said it before, I'm an ex-Trans Canada employee, and that was a TC project that I was there. I worked there at the time that project was being proposed. And
Wow.
I'm curious to know what the discussion you wanted to have, and if it's something that you want to talk about here, or if you'd like to park that for another discussion on another Indigenous Matters evening. Oh, I've got another one that wants to come up. We'll bring you up. And so, anyways, you know how to find me if you want to talk about that any further. Drax for Facts. Hi, Shay. How are you tonight? The floor is yours.
Hey, Way. Well, Alan, for letting me up. I just wanted to say this live has been amazing. And also, in regards to voting, if you do call the candidates and the parties, they often do have the volunteers that will have ride share programs or they'll come and take you to the polls yourself. Also, most municipalities on voting day, bus services and transit is free. So if anyone can't find a ride, doesn't have a ride, isn't comfortable doing that, check to see if you can uh, get on your transit. And for those that are in the hospital, if you actually call Elections Ontario, they often send a guarantor for you to vote with a slip even while in hospital. And I only know that because I work at a hospital and we've had them come in all throughout the last week.
Wow, that's great
Yeah.
information. So, and I'm also curious. I forgot to talk about this too, and thank you for the compliment about our live. Appreciate that. Um, I know that in a federal election, there are laws that, like, employers are obligated to give time off to vote. I just don't know for sure if that's a provincial law as well. Does anybody on our panel know? It's not.
Yeah,
Not here in Ontario anyway.
it is. You are allowed if you are a full-time employee on the day that you work, you are guaranteed 3 hours.
Okay, so they did change that then.
They did, yes.
Okay.
But
I
full-time
thought it had been
employees
that way for
only.
years. Yeah, I thought it had
I know
been that
for
way for years. I've always used that time off to go vote.
hmm
I
and I
guess
know
it
for
matters. I
federal.
guess it just matters on the company because nowhere I've worked has ever really offered it. It's just been, yeah, I go after
Oh,
work or I go on lunch or
I
something.
think
We're
it's part of
told
the
they
that.
don't
Employment
offer it.
Standards Act.
Yeah, they don't offer it, but you are legally entitled to three
Yeah,
hours.
they don't have, I think it's in the Employment Standards Act or one
Yep.
of them.
And it's paid, I
I'll have to
believe.
keep that in mind. Absolutely. I didn't
Yeah.
realize. Okay.
You are legally entitled if you are especially working the 8 to 12 hours that day to take 3 consecutive hours off to go and vote.
Okay.
Yep.
No, see, and even
And
I'm learning new stuff every day. I love it.
I'm pretty sure it's even paid time. Because it's a barrier, right? You can't take these barriers have to be taken down to allow us to participate in this
It's
system.
paid time. And JB had a movement going there last year for a while. He was asking for it to be a stat holiday, any voting days to be stat holidays. And I still think that should be true. I think people should be encouraged to vote that way.
Absolutely.
Plus, I like a good stat holiday. I have no shame in that.
Who doesn't? Oh yeah, and we've got a confirmation in the chat that 3 hours between 8 to 8 is from Lisa Dawn, who I know works in this field. So awesome. This has been a wonderful conversation. I hope, you know what, if we have helped 1, 2, 5, 10 people reconsider voting or be, participating in the election, then it's a win. And the more that we do this, the greater our voices are, And then you know what's going to start happening when they see the Indigenous voting numbers starting to increase in this country, across the provinces and in the territories? They're going to pay more attention to us, and they're going to pay more attention to what they put into these platforms, what their kind of policies they're going to roll out. Because Indigenous rights these are strong rights, and that's why it's really beneficial for them when we don't participate. So I really appreciate
Absolutely.
everybody.
That they're scared of us using what they try to make us not be able to have. And that's why I say, yes, it sucks. We are stuck at this table. We are forced to play their game, but let's play it better than they ever expected us to.
100%.
That's awesome. Yes.
Absolutely, Shay. And you know what we can participate at every level. And there's no reason why we shouldn't. We spend our money in this economy. And that's the only place we spend it, because not many of us, there's a handful of nations that have some urban reserves and do have all of the services that their people need, but there's only a handful. There's 634 First Nations, multiple, like I'm someone said 70, but I'm sure there's more than 70 Métis groups in the country, because in Alberta alone we have more than that. But anyway, so and the Inuit too, like, we are powerful people when we stand together and we act. And because you look what happens to us when we protest, where they take us down. We're not given coffee and donuts, right? We're not. So they know how important our voice is and how firm and true our rights have been tested in the courts. Our rights have been affirmed by the Supreme Court of Canada and are enshrined in the Constitution. So this is a big deal. And it's really sad and unfortunate that we don't participate at the level that we are able to. But we'll get there. I know we will.
Absolutely. And also, if anyone has like a friendship center, or at least in Ontario, we have like Onwa,
Yep.
if you also reach out to those, most of them now, because the funding was granted a few years ago, they have vans, they have buses. If you are uncomfortable taking a ride from the party or city transit, reach out to your friendship centers.
I wonder if BC has that, because we have a Native Friendship Center in Prince George. It'd be good to know if we have that resource too. That's amazing.
Yeah. Lots of good resources in the friendship centers.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Also,
even a lot of the colleges do too.
That's
Oh,
a
yeah.
cool.
good call.
Also
Good.
in rural
Be in school soon.
communities,
Oops.
yeah, also in rural communities, like we've got what's called the roundabout, for people that need help with transportation around town at different times, due to disability and whatnot. So there's also that option. The town or municipality normally has that, and they're willing to accommodate as well. So
Cool.
that's always an option just in case.
And another thing that we didn't talk about is it's okay to go and vote and turn back an empty ballot, a blank ballot. Because what you're saying by doing that is that nobody was a good enough candidate for you or met your needs. So that's a vote in itself. And it'll be counted. It's not counted when we don't come to the polls. Then we're just a nothing. We didn't express our position. So if you feel like you're not being represented by any of the candidates, that's always an option to consider. So,
And we really need to make sure we do get to the polls, because we know who always shows up.
yeah.
We know who's going to either take the entire day off work and give rides. We know this. So we need to ensure that we are putting our voices in. Is it necessarily our voice within a system that we like or accept? No.
Yep.
But it's going to harm us either way. If we play the game or not, we are still going to be affected by it. So fight it.
And no sense in being bulldozed, right? If you're going to be in that system, fight, 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 fight. And even just these conversations and the education, like the amount of information in the last 20 minutes about voting is mind boggling,
Oh, that's good. I'm glad. That makes me happy, because that's what we wanted to accomplish tonight. was to have a good, meaningful conversation about voting and hopefully motivating some folks in Ontario to get a little more active and get to those polls. So we have about 10 minutes left, and I think maybe this is a good time to do some closing remarks. And we'll go start at the top and work through. So from Sasquatch to Anti-Bougie, then Shay, then I'll turn it to Progressive Moose, and I'll close the night out. So Sasquatch, my friend, the floor is yours.
I'm going to keep it very short and sweet since I am in BC and not Ontario, and I'm not Indigenous. I am going to say thank you for letting me be a part of the conversation, and thank you for all of the information. And I have nothing but respect for how hard people in bands worked for their people, and all of you guys trying to get people out to vote, vote, vote. I appreciate all your hard work, and I'm going to just leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Sasquatch, for joining our discussion. We appreciate you. Every voice matters. So tell your friends. If you got friends in Ontario, tell them too. All
You
right,
bet.
Auntie Bougie, floor is yours, my friend.
Oh, I don't have much to say to close it. Thanks for having me up. And people, I've seen a couple of comments about who should I vote for or anything like that. And I always say, go look at your local candidates, vote for who would represent you best. And that's the best you could do. Really, just be informed.
Thank you so much for that. And again, I want a reminder about smartvoting.ca. So if you are so inclined, like some of us, we want to be a little more mindful about how we can get one leader out and replaced with another, no matter who the other is. So there's a tool you can use to figure out what's the best way to remove Doug Ford and how best to vote, if that's what your goal is. We're not here to tell you how to vote or who you should vote for. We just want to encourage everyone to vote and be informed to do so. Thank you, Auntie Bougie. I really appreciate having you join the conversation tonight. You're welcome to join us every Monday if you'd like. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good night. Shay, the floor is yours for some closing remarks.
Oh, I hate being on the spot, but well, Alan for having me up. Um, and just what everyone has said, go educate yourself on who you think will best represent you. Remember, you are their boss. They can give out all the promises they want, but you need to hold them accountable before and after they get in. We know who is harmful. We've already seen what's happening. So let's try to ensure that our people are safe, that everyone is safe. Healthcare is at risk. Pension is at risk. Transportation is at risk. Language is at risk. Is that worth losing for someone else to get richer? Is our water less important than
Yes.
building new roads?
Yes.
Are our forests less important than building a new condo? Think about what really matters to you and how the next 7 generations are going to be able to survive from what you decided to vote in. And that's all I got to say. So, well, Alan,
Absolutely. And as even someone that was raised by loggers, it's so important to protect the environment. There's a way to do it, and we can do it in a safe way that doesn't destroy our environment. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Shay, so much. Those were powerful words, great messaging, and thank you for that support, Sasquatch. Progressive Moose, take it away, my friend. Let's close it up.
Yeah, I pretty much, I think, covered the bases in terms of what I can cover. The biggest thing to me is, especially in Ontario, our last election, we had less than 20% of people actually show up to vote. And that's a part of why we ended up with such a conservative majority in Ontario. So honestly, guys, just get out to vote. And I don't care who you vote for, just get out and vote because our system works better the more people that vote.
Yep.
And that's the strongest message I can ever give somebody when it comes to politics, when it comes to voting. The more votes that get out there, the better our system works. So get get yourself out there, get your ballot in, and let your voice be heard through the system that we have. Let's take it back.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And my closing remark is I just want to kind of echo what Shay said too, and it's such a valid point. We as Indigenous people, we think about our next generations and planning for that future and ensuring that our next 7 generations are afforded the same way of life that we have, if not better. Hopefully always better, but retention of language, retention of culture, retention of identity is so important. And I want to remind everybody out there, our Indigenous friends and family, as well as the non-Indigenous, we are also the voice for those that can't speak, our relations, the standing ones, the trees, the four-legged, the winged, the swimmers, and the crawlers. They don't have a voice. We're their voice at that table. So please make sure you get out and vote when you can. I'm Treaty 6 Birder. Follow me, and if you have other ideas that you want to talk about on Indigenous Matters, we're here every Monday night on Beaver Politics at 6 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. I am open to discussing anything around Indigenous rights, our role in politics in Canada. So please, if you have ideas or things you want to talk about, like Terry did earlier, I'm open and I'm happy to have those conversations. Join us at Beaver Politics 7 days a week now. On Sundays, we have the Damn Happy Life with Happy. He's our newest Beaver. Mondays is my night, Treaty 6 Birder, Indigenous Matters. On Tuesday, we have the News Hour with Frontline Feminist, where she goes over the top news headlines of the day or the week and goes over some of that and shares some insight on those things with us. On Wednesdays, we have the Mossy Side with the Progressive Moose, who was my co-host tonight. He talks about all kinds of interesting things from an Ontario lens and just a good conversation. I really enjoy being in his show. And then we also have on Thursday afternoons, Pixie Lee. She's doing something with a purple crayon. I always forget the title of her show, but join her. She goes over different historic matters and talking about BIPOC issues and things. And then on Thursday night at 6 o'clock again, Mountain Standard Time, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, we have Beaver Politics, which is an open discussion with mostly friendlies. It's not a debate night, but where we talk about politics in Canada, whatever the news headlines are, but more of an open discussion. We usually have 3 topics we'll talk about. And then on Friday afternoon, we have the Mrs. and Navigation Station, where she helps people navigate the Canadian political scene, the tools, things we need to know, just like kind of what we were talking about today with relation to the election in Ontario. And then on Friday nights, we have Polytalk, which is hosted by Nerdy. This is the debate. If you want to get in and debate and talk about issues, come join us. Sometimes she's gone 6 hours, but I don't know if we're going to do 6 hours again, but she has done it. And then we also on Saturdays, we have the mental health with Jana. And she talks about mental health and other issues around that. And then Saturday nights, we have Radicalized with Mr. Radical. And this week, we have a special event going on. We're going to have a 24-hour marathon for the Ontario election. I think it's starting Wednesday to Thursday night at 10 o'clock. Is that Eastern Standard Time, Moose?
So it'll be 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time is when we're starting Wednesday. It's going to start off with my show, The Mossy Side with the Moose, and we're going to continue on 24 hours. It'll be probably over because we'll be covering the actual results of the election as well. So, guys, it'll probably end up being 26, 27 hours straight. We'll switch out with host every 3 hours or so, so it will be a new stream, but it'll be constant coverage. One will be going off and the next one will be going on, and we'll be bringing it to you live all day long.
Woohoo! So that's it for my show. I'll as my friend here, the Progressive Muse says, stay safe, stay sane, and I like to say, stay deadly. So I'll see you next week at Indigenous Matters. Thank you for sharing your time with us.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everybody.
Have a good night, everyone.